Hello everyone and Happy New Year. Welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. This is the time of year we bring you our annual roundtable discussion with our ag economists, and we're still doing that this year, except there's no roundtable. We are bringing you great perspective from our experts, but it looks a little bit different this year. On the agenda today, analysis and discussion with Larry Sanders, agricultural economist, Amy Hagerman, Ag Policy Specialist, Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist, and Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist. First up are Dr. Sanders and Dr. Hagerman, and what a year that 2020 was, my goodness. If we could narrow it down a little bit in terms of politics and policy, we want both of you to weigh in. Larry, let's start with you.
Well, here we were a year ago and we said, barring any wild cards, it's going to be a great year. And what a wild card we got with the virus. We lost 3 to 5 years of building up a good economy with the virus coming along. And it took a real nosedive. It started coming back in August and September. We're not sure we're really out of the woods yet. If we can kick the virus here with the vaccine over the next couple of months, consumers are going to come back and pull us out of the skids, and there's a good chance we're going to have a good 21. But 2020, we all want to put in the record books as being a tough year because consumers are the engine of the economy, and they are down for the count for 2020.
As you look back at 2020, Amy, in terms of policy, what are the takeaways that you have in terms of Oklahoma?
Yeah, I mean, just really building on what Larry said and narrowing it down maybe into agriculture a little bit and the effects, some of those consumer impacts he's talking about, some of those unemployment impacts, all those things had on agriculture. You know, one of the big programs that we had here in the state was the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. We had round 1 that started back in May, round 2 that started in September. This made up a pretty big chunk of our farm revenues for this year. Upwards of 40% of our farm revenue actually came from policies this year. And I think that's something to watch going forward into the future. You know, the good news is that we've seen some recovery in prices that Kim and Derrell will talk about. And that again paints a little brighter picture for 2021. Best case scenario we want to see is that market prices recover to a point that these safety net policies really don't have to kick in 2021 the way they did in 2020, and then the ad hoc assistance on top of that in 2020.
Even though there were plenty of lows this year, there definitely were some positive things that happened. Let's talk about a couple of the highlights.
Well, again, you know, we started out the year with a lot of optimism because the Trump administration did come through with negotiating the phase 1 trade deal with China. And although there had been several deals made with China that went down the tubes, we had high hopes for phase 1, especially the producers in agriculture here in Oklahoma. And it looked as if that was going to really work out. And then the virus came along and things didn't quite go as planned, and it looked like we were going to have to implement some more tariffs. So it didn't quite go the way we thought it would.
But at least there was some optimism.
Yes.
Amy, your take?
I think one of the things I think positive out of 2020 was actually the increased awareness by consumers on our food supply chain, how complicated it is, and then also how that results in food being in their grocery store and on their table. It's a problem we've had for a while with our small farming population compared to the broader population, and them really understanding the importance of agriculture, how their food is produced and where it comes from and how it gets to their plate. So I do think that increased awareness is a positive thing to come out of 2020 and could lead to more informed conversations going forward for agriculture.
As we kind of think about the new year and hopefully approach it with optimism, what kind of guidance do you have for Oklahoma producers, both of you? And Larry, why don't you start off? How can we approach the year?
Well, you know, in good years, we have the government policies waiting in the wings as the helper of last resort. And as Amy said, they came through in 2020 to really help lift up the producers with up to 40% of their income, and also with consumer assistance. And they're probably going to help consumers out in the early part of 2021 with the Biden as the president, and they're going to have the House, and we're going to see how tough it's going to be in the Senate, split the way they are. And I think that as the consumers come back on board, trade is going to come back. Biden is going to really push hard to get the trade side back on board, and they're going to come through. So I think we're going to see the first half of the year be a fight, but it's going to pull back, and it's going to pull the producers back onto the world scene, and we're going to have a pretty good year for agriculture. And it's going to be the market pulling it through if it can, and if it can't, I think the government's going to be there to help them out in the summertime.
Amy, your take?
So I think just again, building on to that, I think producers just watching what's happening in the market, watching those fundamentals, seeing the extent to which we get that recovery in the fundamentals is going to be really critical. Just as a reminder for those safety net programs we're talking about waiting in the wings, the deadline for re-election for the ARC and PLC program for our crop producers is going to be March 15th. That means they've got some time to watch the market to see what it might do for the 2021 crop year before making their decisions on what to do for that. Of course, we've got to watch the drought as well, watch those crop conditions in the coming year and what that might mean for our producers. Basically, I hope that in 2021, we really see a return to fundamentals where we're watching the weather, we're watching what's happening in markets, we're seeing that recovery in our trade markets, and then seeing that recovery in our economy that will really boost up our domestic consumption.
And hopefully no more wild cards. We've had enough for a while, right?
Have we ever? This is a year we don't need another wild card.
For sure. Okay, well, great talking to you both as always, and we wish you all a very happy new year. Thank you.
Same.
So obviously if we have livestock in a pasture, we need some type of fencing to keep them in. In the case of smaller animals such as goats and sheep, often woven wire is used. And it's very effective at keeping sheep and goat in the pasture. However, it also presents some problems for wildlife. Now we often want this fence to keep coyotes out to protect the animals, but a fence like this is not much of a barrier for coyotes. A coyote can scale a 6-foot fence, they can climb this, they can certainly jump it. So a fence like this would need some electric wires attached to it to really do a good job at keeping a coyote out. But a fence like this is a barrier for really small animals, things like cottontail rabbits and box turtles. They can't move through this. And we can take small sections out of the fence, like we could cut one of these squares out that would allow these smaller mammals and smaller reptiles to easily move through the fence and not be such a barrier for them. One thing you have to think about though, if you start cutting segments out of the fence, is that that will make it easier for coyotes to enter. And generally, the smallest opening that a coyote can squeeze through is about 6 by 4 inches. So if we cut one of these squares out that would allow, let's say, a box turtle to move through, that's going to be right on the fringe of what a coyote could come through, so that there's a trade-off there. But certainly this is a real barrier and a problem for lots of wildlife, and if you're wanting to make it easier for them to move through, we might take one of these sections out, let's say every 50 to 100 yards to allow some passage, and then maybe think about incorporating an electric line to do a better job keeping the coyotes from coming under or trying to dig under that fence. And that way you're keeping out the wildlife that you don't want in the pasture, but allowing other wildlife to freely move through the fence. The
The livestock market started off on a good foot in 2020, but Derrell, things changed pretty quickly.
Well, they obviously did. You know, we started this year fairly optimistic in terms of where we were with, you know, beef production was going to be up a little bit, but we expected prices to be a little bit higher in 2020. Trade situation looked pretty favorable. Obviously, that all changed in March when the pandemic really took a hold of the market. And so, you know, we saw a couple of different waves of impacts specifically, or at least largely impacting the beef or the meat industries in general and beef specifically. You know, in March, we shut down half of the market basically from a food standpoint. So we closed down food service. That immediately shoved all of the food demand onto half of the market, if you will. That was a big challenge and lots of stress. We did see some initial shortages simply because we didn't have product where it needed to be, and consumers were, you know, concerned about how things were going to play out. So they actually made the situation worse by trying to overbuy at a time when we were struggling to get the product into the right place in the market. About a month later, as we went into April, then the COVID-19 really hit the labor force in our packing and processing facilities. And so with the reductions there, we actually had to close some plants. A lot of plants were reduced in their capacity for several weeks. And so then we had a real shortage happen for a short period of time. We simply couldn't make the product. And so, those impacts continued through that part of the year. As we moved through the summer, the packing plants came back online actually fairly fast. And so we've been back to sort of producing on schedule, if you will, for the second half of the year. And, you know, food service, you know, ended up the year still diminished. In fact, we're having continuing problems late in the year with the pandemic, if you will. And so lots of challenges continuing there. One of the things interesting about 2020 is when it was all said and done, we wound up producing just about the amount of meat that we thought we would. Certainly for beef and even for pork and poultry, we came in within about 1.5% of what our initial projections were back in January.
Well, that's really surprising, especially given, you know, in the summer when we were talking in regards to cattle producers were really in Oklahoma were having to make some really tough decisions.
That's right. We had lots of challenges. You know, the disruption in the packing plants caused all kinds of problems in the fed cattle market. Backlogs. We didn't have to depopulate like the hog industry did, but we did, you know, we did struggle for many weeks into the fall before we got caught up on the fed cattle markets. At the same time all of that was happening, we had drought conditions persistent through the summer in some regions, expanding, kind of coming and going on the margins, but generally getting, you know, a little bit worse as we move through the last part of the year. And so that's created lots of challenges, and certainly in some parts of the country for producers relative to pasture, hay supplies, and really setting us up for what we're going to be looking at in the coming year.
You know, speaking of that, you know, going forward, and you know, we always ask you around this time of year, what do you expect, and what's some advice that you give to producers going into the next year?
Well, as we start 2021, you know, I think one of the good things we have going for us is the fact that meat demand and beef demand in particular stayed very strong through 2020. And that's a little surprising, but we had a lot of things going on. We did have major recession forced on the economy, if you will, but at the same time we had a lot of government stimulus and other things. We still have certainly a lot of ripple effects from that going into 2021. And so, you know, but at the same time, beef demand at this point continues to look pretty strong as we go into the next year. So, you know, we've got, you know, cattle producers, I think are going to look for certainly more stability as we go into 2021. It's going to take at least the first half of the year as we bring a vaccine in and get the pandemic under control. You know, the second half of the year could look quite a bit different than the first half of the year. And so, you know, we're looking at, and the trade picture will probably improve a little bit as we go forward. We're looking for exports to rebound a little bit as far as beef goes. And at the same time, imports will probably reduce a little bit on a year-over-year basis. So all of those things are generally pretty positive for the beef industry.
You know, when we spoke to you last week, you mentioned that this was a global pandemic, but a lot of things could change with a vaccine in regards to the markets. So what do you like? I know it's really hard to speculate that far into the future, but what do you anticipate?
You know, even more than usual, this is a tough one to try to call in terms of, you know, sort of our price expectations for 2021. At this point, we're still, I'm going to say, cautiously optimistic for modest improvements on an annual basis for cattle prices in 2021. You know, probably in the 5 to 8% range. But that's an average, and actually there could be a lot of movement along the way. And certainly there's risk to the downside if something happens and we don't get the pandemic under control, or it takes longer than we think, then that might weigh on the market pretty heavily. On the other hand, if we're, you know, if that goes pretty smoothly and we get that under control, again, the second half of the year could be quite strong, and we could wind up you know, improving those price forecasts, certainly in the second half of the year relative to the way we're going to start the year.
Well, Derrell, we always appreciate all the work that you're doing, and, you know, especially in 2020, because it has been such a hard year. So we just want to wish you a happy new year, and hopefully 2021 is going to be a lot better than 2020.
We sure hope so. Better for all of us.
All right, thanks, Derrell. Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Last week on the Cow-Calf Corner, we talked to you about utilizing colostrum in order to get the antibodies that baby calf needs in the first few hours of life. What I want to do today is to really go into the why it's so important that that baby calf gets some colostrum, certainly within the first 6 hours of life. You see, that baby calf has no real antibody protection against diseases when he's first born. He has an immune system, it's just not activated and up and running. So the only antibodies he has is what he's going to get either from his mother or from you providing it with colostrum like we talked about last week, or perhaps a colostrum replacer. It's important that that happens very, very soon after birth, because the intestine of that baby calf goes through a process we call intestinal closure. And what that means is that there's some specialized cells on the lining of the intestine of each of these baby calves that has the ability of absorbing those very, very large protein molecules called antibodies or immunoglobulins. Those cells slough off just as soon as that baby calf is born, and they slough off even faster as he ingests any kind of food. So that's why it's important that the first meals that that baby calf gets is one that has those antibodies in it. Regular colostrum from his mother or a colostrum replacer that you might provide. If you're having to take care of a baby calf that perhaps was born through a difficult calving process, is just too sluggish to get up and nurse in time, or perhaps his mama is one of those first calf heifers that you can tell just doesn't have very much milk, and you're going to have to feed that baby calf in order to get him started. Remember that you want to make sure that the first diet, the first meal that he gets, is the one that contains the most antibodies, the most immunoglobulins. And certainly then, after he gets about 2 meals of colostrum, then we can start with whole milk or whatever we're going to feed that calf for the next few days. It's important that that first meal be the one that has those antibodies in it because of this process that we call intestinal closure. We hope that helps you better understand why we talk about getting that colostrum in that baby calf in the first 6 hours of life. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
And we're continuing on with this round table that was for 2020. Kim, it has been a Jekyll and Hyde year for wheat prices.
Well, it's been Jekyll and Hyde year for just about all the crop prices. You look at wheat, we came in January around $4.50. We got into March, it was still around that $4.50. It got down below $4 in March, and then in about 2 weeks' time in late March, it went up and hit $4.50 again and up to $4.75. We got into harvest around $4.50, $4.60. It trended down below $4 again as we got into late July, and then it started an uptrend, bottomed out into August at around $3.90, $3.80, somewhere in there. And then in October, we started to rally and got up to almost $5.60. In wheat, it was a Jekyll and Hyde year. Now you look at corn, came into the year relatively good corn prices. Corn prices bottomed out in the March-April time period, and then we got about a 70 or 80 cent price increase. The good thing for the corn producers is that we got that high price as they were harvesting. In wheat, we got the low price while they were harvesting. So it was bad for wheat, good for corn. You look at soybeans, same thing as about corn, came in. Remember beans, as we got into that March-April time period, when they're planting, you had beans $7.70 a bushel. What are they today? Oh, around over $11 a bushel. So we had bean prices going down, the Jekyll down, and then the Hyde coming back up late in the year. You watch cotton, it came up, last year it's up in the 70s, almost 80s. We got down to 56, 58 cents as we came into the cotton marketing year, and now cotton prices are back up 69, 70 cents.
So many times supply and demand kind of drive those things. Is that what we're seeing with the trade situations?
Well, I think you're seeing a lot of supply and demand in there. We watch supply and we talk about ending stocks and the stocks issue. I think changes in the demand have had impacts this year. You look at wheat, we came into harvest, the relative crop. We talk about the Black Sea crop. That Russian crop kept increasing throughout the fall, but yet our prices kept going up. Why? Because I think we had increases in demand. Our importers, because of COVID and other reasons, they realized that their stocks weren't high enough for their food supply for emergencies. And so what we saw was increases in demand, and I think that resulted in increases in price. Of course, you look at corn stocks, we had them over 2 billion bushels. Corn stocks has been going down. So I think we had a supply situation on the corn. In the beans, it's a supply but demand from China. China just came in and bought a lot of beans, and Brazil sold all their beans and had to buy a cargo from the United States. Right. So we had both supply and demand on different situations impacting prices this year.
Let's really look at the Oklahoma crop. How have all of those commodities really handled in the 77 counties in Oklahoma in 2020? And then on top of that, how do things look for 21?
Well, if you're looking at Oklahoma on the wheat, now I think the wheat producer is their time in the barrel. As we came into harvest, the prices were relatively low. Started at $4.50, they go down to below $4. So we had prices going down during the harvest, and so I think that was bad for our producers because the majority of our wheat is sold at harvest. You get in the corn and soybeans and cotton harvest, they were harvested when prices were going up and relatively good. You look at the current prices, you got wheat at $5.30 in most of the state, up $5.45 in a couple of places. Corn, $4.10, $4.60 in the panhandle. Soybeans, $11, a little higher. Milo, $1.50 premium to corn. Why? Because of China, $5.50. Cotton in around 60 cents. Now, if you're looking out at this next year, I think it's going to be, 21 has the potential to be a really good year for producers. A wheat situation, right now our forward contract for wheat, $5.20 to $5.35. That's $1 above what it was this time last year. You look at corn prices, forward contract $4 in most Oklahoma, $4.20 in the Panhandle area. Milo, now the forward contract for Milo is $4.41 and $4 in the Panhandle. But remember, Milo was up around $4.50. So as China stays in the market for Milo, it may be another year that you wish you could have raised Milo. Soybean prices current around $11. The forward contract $9.70 to $9.25 depending on the location. But I think what we're seeing now, cotton 69 cents is where we are. Now I don't have any forward contract price for cotton, but I think that upward trend it should hold. Canola around $6.50, sesame around 39 cents. So I think we've got some relatively good prices as we're coming into 21. And the supply and demand situation, especially the stock situation, is tight, especially for bread, flour, wheat. And if we lose a crop anywhere, then we're going to see $6, $7 wheat prices. Corn stocks, you know, they were over 2 billion bushels. We lose a corn crop, those prices are set to go up. And soybean stocks are really low. So weather's going to determine price, but there's a potential for some relatively high prices this year.
So many times, let me back up. There was a lot of if in what you said, a lot of potential for variation in there. What should the Oklahoma producer do in 2020 whenever it comes to moving acreages?
I think there's a lot of opportunity in 2021 for the producer. I think it's the year that they evaluate their soil, evaluate their managerial ability, evaluate their equipment, and determine the options that they have, put a strong pencil to it, and then I think diversify a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
That'll do it for this year's modified roundtable discussion. From all of us at SUNUP, we wish you and your family a very safe and happy new year. And we certainly thank you for watching each and every week. And we will see you next time at SUNUP.